Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Gen X News. Here we are. I'm so sorry. Some people don't mind a 5-minute intro. For me, it just gives you guys a chance to flood in here and it gives people an alert for 5 minutes that this show is coming and it is going live. And today we are streaming, of course, on X, Rumble, and YouTube. So remember, thumbs up if you're watching on any of those channels. Heart it, share it, interact, helps the show grow, helps me show up on the algorithm. God knows I need it at YouTube. The algorithm does not like me over there. I'm apparently not a very well-behaved YouTuber. We got a strike. We got a strike the other week. I was streaming a documentary and making commentary on it, and I got a strike for my first time after having this channel for, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years. So anyways, help it grow. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you want to subscribe anywhere, all the links to the live streams are at genxonx.com. That's GENXONX.com. You can subscribe to those. You can also listen on the audio podcast. All those links are there. You can also donate. You want to donate to the podcast? There's the PayPal, there is the Cash App, and the Venmo links. They're all there. I'm not going to go through that. I have a wonderful guest here today returning, Dr. Dean Bertram. He is going to be talking about UFOs. That's right, the UFO deception. I don't know. Most of us probably have this concept of UFOs that are like mechanical, solid UFO, typical stuff that you hear of flying saucers. And the question is could they be something else? And we're going to find that out. Also, before I bring Dean in, remember this Sunday, we are Conspiracy Theory Sunday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Please join me. I don't know what we're going to be talking about. Jordan Peterson pulled some crazy stuff today, so I might mention him. I might mention, I don't know. We'll go there. You'll know. I'll put it up, but show up on Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Just letting you guys know I'm doing Sundays now. So we'll see you then. And Monday, I think I'm going to live stream the election results in Canada. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see how I feel about that, if I even care. We'll see. Anyways, so I don't want to keep Dean waiting too much longer. Let's bring Dean in, and we're going to talk about this UFO deception. Welcome to the show, Dean. How's it going?
Greetings, Melissa. It's always great to chat to you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. How did the Midwest Film Fest? How did that go this year?
Midwest
Film Festival.
Midwest Weird Fest. Yeah, it went
Okay.
gangbusters. It was our 9th year, and so we're going into 10 in 2026, which is super exciting. We had the best turnout ever. We sold out all the season passes, all the Friday passes, all of the Saturday passes, multiple individual screenings, because you don't have to buy a pass. You can just come to see a film or to see a block of short films or see a feature film. We had, I think, maybe a record number of filmmakers in attendance as well as audience. So yeah, it was a great fest where, again, which is always wonderful, we are at the very, very, very close to the top of the Film Freeway top-rated film festivals on the planet. Film Freeway is the major film festival submission platform. It has something like 12,000 film festivals on it. It's where almost everybody who has a film submits a film, and the rating system on that platform is based on filmmakers. I think at the moment we're number 23 out of 12,000 festivals.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It's pretty high in the ratings. We're always in the top 100 because Film Freeway always sends you a top 100 badge if you're in the top 100 every month, and we're always in the top 100. But to be 23 is pretty special.
That's phenomenal. And is it like a variety of different categories, or is it UFO focused, or?
No, Film Freeway is every festival on the planet. So, but as far as, you mean our festival or Film Freeway?
Yeah, your festival.
Sure, our festival is, I think it's a fairly broad tent. If your film is weird, we'd love to see it. So we screen everything from horror through sci-fi and fantasy to, you're right, UFO documentaries, Sasquatch documentaries, offbeat weird adult comedies, anything paranormal, anything weird, anything strange or avant-garde or out there or frightening, or that's the type of stuff Midwest Weird Fest. It's like awesome. I've always thought of like a sideshow alley, you know what I mean? But of films, like somewhere which is dark and mysterious.
Yeah, I thought I'd seen something about some horror type of films. I don't like all horror films. Like too much slasher freaks me out, but I like a lot of gothic horror. So, and I am an old school 80s girl who was a huge Nightmare on Elm Street fan. Just letting everybody know.
There would be films you would love, from the paranormal to some horror stuff. There's a lot of films we play there. We're always the first or second weekend in March, and we
Mhm,
also now have, at the same time, in the same cinema, it's a twinplex, we also run the other festival that I founded in Sydney, Australia almost 20 years ago, a Night of Horror International Film Festival. So you might or might not like that one as much because that's all horror, but it's its own program and it's in the
mhm.
other cinema in the
Right.
festival at the same time. So there's a lot of movies and a lot of filmmakers and a lot of folks come in for it.
Well, that's great. I'm glad it's grown so much and it's totally successful. Me and Mike totally have to get out there and check it out.
I was just telling my girlfriend today because I was doing your show, and I'm like, "This is Melissa who I've told you I want to come out to the show with a husband, and hopefully one time they will."
That would be great. That would be great. So, the UFO scene. Um, I asked you what you wanted to talk about, and you said you had been talking about this sort of UFO deception aspect. And what does that mean to you? Like, I listened to your podcast on it, and it's seeming like it's like the mechanical idea we have of it is totally wrong, and maybe there's some kind of more esoteric explanation. Am I wrong there?
No, you're not wrong, and I think you watched, because I sent you a link to an old show I did
Mhm.
just on Talking Weird, which is every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Central live, and I usually have a guest, but I workshopped a chapter in a book that I've been working on for a while, and that chapter was about exactly what you were talking about, that perhaps the UFO phenomenon isn't little gray man in flying saucers visiting us from another planet. I think the entire UFO space, just to begin, is loaded with deception. So I think we've done shows before, you and I, where we've talked about government type deceptions and psyops and the controlled release of information. So that's one aspect of UFO deception. But we've talked about that before. So what I did really want to talk to, what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, is exactly what you were mentioning: the fact that the phenomenon itself, if there is a phenomenon, which it isn't just the government playing games with us to hide other black ops or to run psyops on us or on other countries,
Mhm.
or if it isn't just our own subconscious or our own psychology, playing tricks on us, when we think we see something and it's really something else, or us in a fugue state in bed at night and dreaming we've been abducted by aliens or something. If there is a genuine independent phenomenon, an anomalous phenomenon that isn't us, and that doesn't mean that we aren't contributing to it, and we can get to that as well. But if there is an external agency, an external intelligence, then what might that intelligence be? And I think it's a mistake for us to immediately assume that the intelligence or whatever this is what is presented to us. I think that, and I can go through why I think it's foolish, but I think it's silly to believe what something you don't understand at all tells you it is or presents itself as being.
Right. And there's this idea like a trickster kind of thing, I suppose,
Sure, absolutely.
that we're being I don't know, kind of like a cosmic joke played on us.
I think I think there's lots of possibilities, and I think that's one thing that people in ufology, there have been some researchers that we can talk about, people like John Keel and Jacques Vallée, who have done, and others who've done a good job about considering these other interpretations. And a lot of what I think has probably been influenced by writers like Keel and Vallée and Patrick Harper and a series of folks. So I think, but there probably is a tricksterish element, as you were saying. There's a little, I suppose, allegory that I use in the book, and I probably used in what I sent you, and I think it's worth me just mentioning it here, because I think it's an interesting way of looking at the subject, and that is, if you were a child and you were playing in your front lawn, and if all of a sudden a creeper van pulled up, and out of that van leant a man in a clown suit, and he said, "Hi kid, my name's Funbo the clown, and in the back of this van, I've got puppies and I've got kitties and I've got candy." and we're going to hop in this van and we're all going to my house in Disneyland and we're going to have the most incredible party. It's going to be so much fun. Hop in. Now, if you were a kid and you believed Funbo and you hopped into his van, it would probably be a terrible mistake that you made. And hopefully your children, or rather hopefully your parents, would have warned you. And if you have children, you've warned them about the dangers of listening to a stranger or taking what a stranger presents to you at face value. However, we don't have those kind of warnings about dealings with the anomalous. And I think dealings with the anomalous in some ways are similar. The only difference is, while we might have been taught about, don't trust a stranger in a van who pulls up outside your house, we haven't been taught don't trust the strange being at the end of your bed, or don't trust the strange light you see landing in a field and little men get out of the craft. Don't trust what you think is, what your eyes tell you is an extraterrestrial, because it might not be what it's presenting. But this is a very new space that we're living in, where we don't understand not to trust the other, because older cultures had very firm traditions about being very careful to believe what you were shown or what you were told by other non-human intelligences. And a great example, and my favorite example, is fairy faith in Ireland. If you'd been
Mhm.
raised in Ireland, probably even 50 years ago, but certainly 100 or 200 or 300 years ago, and you were raised with the understandings of fairy faith, that you certainly would have been almost anywhere in Ireland, particularly anywhere rural, which most of the country would have been a couple hundred years ago, you knew that the fairies told you lies. You knew that what was presented to you if you had a fairy encounter wasn't reality. In other words, if you were invited by a fairy maiden to a feast in a fairy palace, and you went there, all these beautiful fairies probably weren't really beautiful fairies. They were probably ugly old crones and weird looking goblins. The
Mhm.
gorgeous palace you were taken to was probably just a dank underground cave. The sumptuous feast you were fed was probably just cow manure. What you saw and what you were told was essentially untrue. In fact, the very word fairy, originally fairies were just thought of as fae, which came from the older romantic, I think, Roman tradition of fates. And Fairy meant the spell that the fays cast, but eventually their power became their name. But that's how central it is
Mhm.
to fairy belief, the idea that what you were shown wasn't true. And more to the point, you were warned not to engage with them at all costs. You were told, don't walk home late at night, particularly don't walk home late at night on a quarter day, like Halloween and Beltane are two
Mhm.
quarter days, for example.
Don't
And
go into a
Bollock, I think.
fairy ring.
Don't go in a fairy ring. Don't fool around with a fairy fort. Don't cut down a fairy tree. There were ways to protect your
Don't
children when they were
don't
babies.
talk smack about the fairies,
Exactly.
right?
And don't talk
Mhm.
about them if you've ever seen them. Don't mention it. Like, if you have an encounter, zip, loose lips sink ships, or might sink your life in this case. But there was,
Oh
and,
my
and it's
god.
not the only culture. There were very clear rules in pre-modern cultures about how to deal with the other. But we're not warned today. So nobody know if you're driving home tonight on a dark back rural road like where I live, and you see a bright light in the sky and you're quite mesmerized, and then you watch it land and it looks like a traditional saucer, and little strange occupants get out of it, and your instant go-to is going to be, because you've seen all the science fiction movies, you probably listen to podcasts like this or Coast to Coast AM, you've watched the
Mhm.
X-Files, you've maybe read a UFO book or two, you're instantly going to think that you saw little extraterrestrials from outer space in a metallic craft, and what was presented to you was real, because we have this thing, seeing is believing. But there were cultures in the past that knew, particularly, again, fairy faith's a great example in Ireland, that seeing wasn't believing, that you could be tricked. And so I think, even to begin this discussion, it's worth realizing that traditionally there have been a number, and we can go into things other than fairy faith. There's a lot we can talk about, but that there has been traditions throughout the history of esoteric thought that you might be deceived by what's presented to you, and that's something which is lost in UFO lore for the most part.
Yeah, and I remember watching a lot of this stuff on in search of. But I had this book series too from Time Life. It was very modern, but I remember like reading a lot of stuff even in England about, like you were talking about fairies. There's like this hill fort, I think it's called like Canterbury Ring, and these people went up there. They're English. It was probably back in the 50s or something, who knows. And he just started levitating right in this thing, and I don't know if they stepped in somewhere that was like magical, or but I read that and I was just like, part of me wanted to go there and check it out, and the other part of me was like, well, I don't know, I want to go inside a ring. Like I was like, oh, nobody. You're right. You don't hear. I read about that, but you don't hear anyone's like, oh, don't go there. We kind of scoff at it with our modern, like godlike egos, you know. Oh, your sound's gone, Dean. I
Oops, I'm
think you
sorry,
muted
espresso.
yourself.
I coughed a little bit before. Yeah, I think that we've forgotten all of those pre-modernity traditions, and today again, it's why the extraterrestrial interpretation is so popular, because it fits in with current scientific ideas. If you'd said you had an encounter with fairies, you'd probably feel far sillier than if you said I had encounters with extraterrestrials, because one fits modern kind of scientific and science fiction tropes. The other one just
Mhm,
sounds silly and, backward. But I
mhm,
personally don't think there's any real difference when you're dealing with any of these traditions to assume that one is more correct just because one ticks the boxes of the time we live in. And that's a real problem with ufology. Ufology often, and you see it particularly in things like ancient aliens and ancient astronaut theory, where there's an assumption that if people in the past are talking about encountering beings with godlike powers, whether it's fairies or gods or demigods or demons or angels or whatever, particularly if they come from the sky, there's this kind of modern conceit of, oh, well, we know better now. Those stupid ancients or our stupid ancestors, they thought they were talking to fairies and gods. Ha ha ha, we know better. It was really extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticula or from Sirius or wherever. We know
mhm.
that now. Of course, we don't know that now. But it's so silly when we want to assume that somehow our current conceptions of what the other might be, i.e., extraterrestrials, has to be the correct one. And all of our forefathers or forebears who had, ancestors going back thousands of years who had their own
Yeah.
encounters with strange beings were all wrong. But somehow now we're in the space age, so we know.
I think it's funny that, people think they were stupid. There might have been more people who were illiterate, maybe, but we're so smart, and if you go and look at the language and their vocabulary, it was much more vast than our vocabulary is today, in a lot of senses. Like, even 120 years ago, they wrote letters, and the
Right.
vocabulary was so it's better than my vocabulary I'm using now, but it was like poetic compared to I would just write it out like, "Hi, I'm right here. Blah, 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 blah." I don't really want to get into the details. Like I'm some women, I'm not like a lot of women would get more elaborate. I'm just not like that. But see some of these letters, like even writing home from World War I or something like that, and I'm like, or the um, American Civil War, and I'm like, wow, these people were like, how could anyone think our ancestors were dumb?
Right. Read letters from children to the editor in papers and magazines in the 19th century. And it's like they're more literate than most adults today, let alone most
Mhm,
children today. Like, they literally, the education level was so much higher. But even beyond that, which I totally agree with you with, I think these older cultures, particularly rural cultures, had more regular contact with these other things. That's how fairy faith in Ireland could develop, I believe.
mhm.
I think because they had such an ongoing tradition of bumping into the other, that they built a system which minimized bumping into the other as much as you could, because it wasn't fun. There was no
Right.
C5, there was no Stephen Greer until we get to spiritualism, right? There was nobody going
Mhm.
out really wanting to, encourage these things to mess around with you in Ireland, because you wanted to avoid them at all costs. But if you did
Well,
encounter them, there were very specific things you should and you shouldn't do to have the best
yeah.
chance to walk away from it,
Well,
including realizing you were being lied to constantly by them. Both by they could
right.
glamour you, and show you visual illusions, but what they might whisper into your ear was a lie as well.
Well, also, like, if you're in the time and if part of the fairy lore is your crops fail or your milk curdles, that's not just a little thing like you go to the store and buy something. That's like you could starve.
Right.
Bye bye village, bye bye, it's serious stuff
Exactly.
for them, right? Like, it's
Exactly.
serious. Like, we don't realize that because we have this big mechanical system where we just go get the food and we don't even know where it comes from, but for them, it's like they're so integral, part of the land and the growing of the food and the animals and the cows, and it's serious business for them.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning too that there were other cultures even older, perhaps than fairy faith, definitely in some cases, which also understood reality in a very different way to how we understand it today. So, two examples would be Christian Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. And both of these things, they date back probably to the first century. And both of them understood that reality as it was presented to us was not the highest form of reality you could attain. And whether you look at that in a completely spiritual way, or whether you look at it in the way perhaps the Matrix movies have looked at it today, the idea that
Mhm.
somehow we're trapped in a baser form of reality. I remember Elon Musk a while ago was one of the big proponents of the idea that we didn't live in a base reality. Now, he was looking at it in a modern computer, program type world where he was like, well, look how far our computing, graphic, and game technology has come in the last 30 years, where we were
Mhm.
playing like Pong or Space Invaders, and now we're have these AI systems where it's getting almost film-like. Now extrapolate that out another 50 to 100 years, and it will be indistinguishable from reality. And then he went, well, so maybe this is a fake reality, but then maybe we're already in a system which is part of another fake reality, and so on. So people like him have suggested that the reality we might be living in, and the Matrix is probably the best example to use because most people have seen those movies, that we're moving
Right.
in something which isn't the reality until Keanu takes the red pill and realizes what the reality is. But that's putting a modern computer kind of, I suppose,
Internet twist
construct
on it.
around it. But there were older versions of it, again, versions from 2000 years almost beforehand, which were
Mhm.
saying the same thing. Plato had this idea that everything we experience is an imperfect reflection of a perfect reality. So a dog is that we have as a pet is an imperfect reflection of the perfect dog. Now, or I'm the imperfect reflection of the perfect man, or this chair is an imperfect reflection of the perfect chair. The Neoplatonists took that, which was probably more of a philosophical game for Plato, and turned it into an actual spiritual reality, where our reality might be like a shattered mirror with thousands of pieces, and all of us and everything else is reflecting a higher spiritual plane, and it's imperfect here. The Christian Gnostics said similar things. The idea that we were trapped in an imperfect reality, we were spirit trapped in this reality, and somehow we had to escape back to a higher spiritual plane. And I think some of those ideas are useful when we think about what we might be experiencing when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, which seems to interact often outside of the laws that we understand of physics. Like if you see Tic Tac videos or you hear about that stuff, or other, other incidences of, this UFO was there and then it accelerated from 0 to, Mach, I don't know, 27 in a
Mhm.
second
Mhm.
or something, just disappeared. These things seem to operate outside of what we consider the physics of today. But if there is a higher plane of existence, these things might be being dropped in by a programmer or by an external intelligence. And Philip K. Dick, the great science fiction writer, probably the greatest or one of the greatest of the 20th century, who we get like Blade Runners and an adaptation of one of his stories, and Minority Reports and other. There's a bunch of them. Anyway, PK Dick had an experience when in the 1970s, when he had a wisdom tooth removed or some kind of dental surgery. And I think in those days you could ring your pharmacist. Maybe you still can. I don't do it, but in America, but maybe you can. And you could get the pharmacist
Mhm.
to deliver you your prescription. So he was waiting for, I think, a painkiller for this, for his wisdom tooth removal or whatever the dental surgery was.
Right.
And when the person came to deliver it, it was a young woman who had the traditional Christian symbol, not the cross, but the older symbol of the Christian fish around her neck. And for whatever reason, maybe a beam of sun hit it first, or maybe it just emanated it. I think Dick said various things, but all of a sudden, a pink beam of light burst out of this necklace and hit Philip K. Dick in the middle of his head. And all of a sudden, he realized the reality he was living in was somehow not real. The 1970s reality he thought he was in was actually just imprinted on top of a first century Rome, where he was simultaneously Philip K. Dick and a Gnostic Christian undergoing persecution in first century Roman times. And he developed this through, and various other strange things happened to Dick after this, but he developed this idea that we were living in a black iron prison. And this all is what kind of led into the Matrix 30, 40 years later, the development of that film series. But Philip K. Dick thought that he was being contacted by something called Valis. He called it one stage vast articulate living intelligence system. At other times he called it Zebra. But it was essentially something from outside of our reality trying to hit him with messages to let him escape the reality we were living in. And he, in his book, The Exegesis, which was published posthumously, which isn't science fiction, and incidentally, he talks about this in some semi-autobiographical novels towards the end of his writing career, including Valis, which is probably the best example. So if people want to read more, I'd suggest reading Valis first, but The Exegesis is heavier going, but also worth reading. He suggested that Valis seemed to operate very much like the UFO phenomenon operated. It seemed to zap around, not obey the laws of physics, have a trickster
Mhm.
element. And so if Valis was dropping into this reality to try to wake us up, that we were somehow in not the ultimate higher level reality, to Dick, perhaps the UFO phenomenon was doing the same thing. Somehow it was here to shake up our understanding of this reality. It was a kind of like, I suppose, a disruptor thrown into the system.
Right, so we can become aware of the contrast?
Right. So we can be aware that when these things aren't behaving in a way that fits with our normal 9 to 5 reality of wake up, eat breakfast, clean my teeth, get in my car, drive to my cubicle at work for 8 to 9 hours, drive home, watch Netflix,
Uh,
eat Chinese or pizza or whatever on my couch, pass out, and rinse and repeat for the next 40 years of my life. That somehow these things, which is far stranger, might be sent to somehow wake us up.
I'll have to say that, like, ever since doing these shows and conspiracy theories and looking at the reality things, it was so difficult to go to work and watch people who are, like, totally unaware and eating the crap food, and it was really difficult for me to even talk to them or have a discussion or even relate to that. I was like, maybe I'm an alien now. Maybe I'm an alien in the system now." But, it's
Well, there was a
weird
Gnostic
that
idea as well. There was a Gnostic idea, and you see this in some modern alt-right talk, and you also see it in the film The Matrix as another example, that potentially there are NPCs, as they're referred to, or the soulless ones, as the Gnostics referred to them, or in the Matrix, they might just be these other people who have no
yeah,
consciousness. Perhaps there are some of us who are more awake or more aware, and there
mhm.
are other things engaging with us which aren't at a higher spiritual plane, or maybe they've forgotten who they are, or maybe they're not even us. I mean, these are all ideas within this as well, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting, an idea of something to wait. Would it be like a positive, or like are there aliens that are like, because I did a show on the Black Cube and elite worship of Saturn and tied it into Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Could it be a little negative thing that's coming to like wake up a bad part of human consciousness? You know what I mean? Like make you more aggressive or riled up?
That's a good point. And speaking of Kubrick, it's something that the book that's taking me forever to finish. It's kind of an adaptation of my PhD dissertation where I can go a little crazy with some of the theory that I couldn't have gotten away with when I was in academia. And even in the chapter that I've been kind of basing this chat with you on tonight is that in Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 and Kubrick's film version, the idea of the black obelisk is an incredibly potent idea. The idea that there is this some type of non-human artifact which has driven us in evolution from essentially ape men up to the stars and beyond is a
Mhm,
potent idea. And John Keel, again, the author of the Mothman prophecies, and along with Jacques Vallée, one of the people who probably in the ufological space was most open to looking at other interpretations other than just, the standard extraterrestrial hypothesis. Keel took that idea in his book, The Eighth Tower, and he kind of ran with it. He didn't necessarily think it was an extraterrestrial um, intelligence or an extraterrestrial artifact, which might be implied in those films and then in the film and in the book, but rather he
mhm,
used it as a kind of allegory for what he called the great phonograph in the sky. The idea that there might be something constantly repeating and sending messages to us, part of what John Keel called the super spectrum, which was this non-human, I suppose, energy source, energy thing above and beyond us that was bombarding us sometimes with signals and with, I guess, energy that made us have these experiences with everything from extraterrestrials to the Virgin Mary to fairies and everything in between.
mhm. Well, have you noticed that? Oh, sorry. Go
Now you
ahead
go.
if you're gonna continue. I was gonna say, have you noticed, because I was talking about this, like, there's a black it's not necessarily an obelisk, but there's, like, a black cube, and it's everywhere in all religions. Like, it's like this weird symbol, and it shows up, like, whether it's in Mecca or there's a black cube concept in choosing the pope. There's a black cube, and there's the on Saturn, it turns into a cube, and, like, they think there's, like, some kind of weird worship with this black cube. It's
I've
weird.
heard about it. I'm not an expert on it, but I've certainly heard
Yeah.
about it. It's
So
super
I found,
strange.
like, him showing the obelisk and that stuff and those concepts, and I see all these black cube worship everywhere. I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if there's, like, some kind of strange connections," and then there's aliens and UFOs, and I was like, "Huh, that's interesting."
Well, I mean, maybe that is part of it. Maybe this is all interconnected, and I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think Keel's suggestion of a great phonograph in the sky, the idea that there's something which is just bombarding us with messaging and it appears in different ways at different times and fits our various cultural expectations, is a very is a useful, I suppose, model to think about some of these things. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it might be a great phonograph is mightn't be the best. I'm not criticizing Keel because he was amazing, but it mightn't be the best analogy. Maybe a better one would be like a great broadcast system in the sky, right? Something which is sending out signals all the time to us. But I wonder if it's waiting for a reply back. But I wonder if we can't send a reply back. I wonder if we're more like a short wave radio transmitter rather than we're a receiver. We're not a transceiver. We can't do both. We're not
Right.
like a
We
CB
can't
radio or a
send.
ham radio. Maybe all we can do is receive these messages, or maybe we just don't know how to respond. Maybe we're not capable of responding. But to
Maybe
Keel's
they're
point of the great
preventing us
phonograph,
from responding.
sorry, what was that?
Maybe modern technology is preventing us from
Maybe,
responding.
maybe. That's a good point. No, I mean, it's quite possible. I think for whatever reason, we're unable to engage with it very well. We're able to experience it, but I can experience, a record or a CD, or I can listen to my radio. It's not me having any engagement
Mhm.
with it. It's me just receiving the messaging. And that said, maybe we are engaging with it to the degree that, and this is another part of when I talk about UFO deception, because I think there's self deception involved here too. I think that many of the things that we see and we connected with the things we believe when it comes to flying saucers. Like, it seems to me to be quite unlikely that the UFO phenomenon perfectly lines up with, and this would be a much longer discussion, but it seems to perfectly line up with what I call X-Files UFO belief. It seems to line up with all these things which we've been taught about in popular culture for the last however many years, that there's a secret plan with US government and aliens, and that they look like little gray men, and that something crashed at Roswell, and the ideas of science fiction and ufology have kind of combined. And then there's all these psyops which we've talked about at other times, like the Benowitz affair, and Air Force intelligence being mixed up in sending false information to UFO researchers, and all of these things seem to be exactly what we believe about UFOs. In some ways, what we also experience. But it seems to me pretty unlikely that pop culture and US Air Force intelligence operations and what ufologists were guessing about UFOs back in the day all seem to line up to give us exactly what the phenomenon is that we're experiencing. It seems more likely to me that this belief system is somehow infected, is a loaded term, I guess, but has somehow influenced our expectations when we bump into a flying saucer on a back road, or when something appears at our bedroom at night, or when we
Mhm.
see something flying in our at my back 40 tonight. We tend to bring all these beliefs to those experiences.
Right.
So I think in a way, there's when we talk about UFO deception, I think it's clear or it's important to be aware that it's likely that there's some self deception happening as well, because most people do have, even whether they're going to UFO cons or whether they're saying they're a UFO believer or not, most people have had these ideas pumped into their heads since back in the late
Right.
40s into the 50s. So when they have an experience today, or they encounter the anomalous, the same way that our great grandparents might have had assumptions about witches or fairies or anything else, there's a belief system there which I think we transpose onto the experience, if that makes sense.
Right. So you never get to really know what it is because it kind of reflects what's in you.
Right. Absolutely.
So how could you ever know?
I don't think we can. That's
It's
the
more like
scary thing.
it's more like a self-exploration. It's like they're helping you explore yourself. Here I am, I'm therapy.
Maybe that's all. Maybe that's all this is. You know what?
I'm
That's
a
not even that
cosmic
silly, because
therapist. I'm a cosmic therapist.
maybe. I mean, I do, and I don't think that's that silly, because I often wonder if at some level, all of these things fulfill some deep seated human need for mystery that can never be solved. Like, going back again to fairy lore, a lot of those older fairy tales would have people who visited the fairies or were abducted by the fairies or whatever grab a piece of, treasure, or grab something from fairyland to try to prove their story when they came home. And when they would pull it out of their pocket, the gold pieces or the whatever, the fairy artifact was, it would just turn to dust, or it would be leaves in their pockets instead, like old dried up leaves or something. And in ufology, you find the same thing again and again. We can never quite get that evidence that we need to prove
Hmm.
that. And incidentally, it's the same also in ghost hunting. It's the same in cryptozoology. It's the same in all of these things which make our world richer and more
It's
fascinating. We
yeah,
can never quite get
it's
that evidence we need.
it's like trying to bite your teeth. You just can't.
Right.
I'll try. It's gonna be hard unless you got
Eh,
dentures. And even then, like, really, like, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's the impossible feat.
but I mean, it's still it'd almost be listen, I don't ever think we're gonna have any solution, and I think we've talked about things like disclosure, and you and I have it in the past, but I don't think there's ever gonna be if there's ever a disclosure from the government, I'll be super suspicious anyway that they're finally telling me the truth after the UFO community haven't trusted the government to tell them the truth since, the late 1940s. So it's so funny now the UFO community demanding the government to tell them the truth. All they really want are their views validated. All the UFO community wants is for the government to say,
Right.
yes, we captured craft at Roswell. Yes, we back engineered them. Yes, there are gray extraterrestrials. And then they'll go, yay, I told you so. That's all they
Right.
want. They don't
Well,
actually there's no mystery. They already know the answers. They
yeah.
just want the
They
government
want
to affirm what they
confirmation.
believe, right?
Oh, we kind of have this really abusive relationship with the government. On one hand, we don't trust it, we don't like them, we did it, but yet we want them to confirm for us everything so that we feel good about ourselves. It's like you got to stop that because the
Right.
government's not there to make you feel good about yourself. I hate to inform you of this. That's kind of a weird dysfunctional relationship, and they'll never do it for you. I think you might have frozen up there a bit, Dean. I think Dean froze up. We'll wait for him to come back here and see if his internet. He's in the cabin in the woods, so the internet might just be freezing up a little bit. But seriously, guys, the government's not here to be our friend. They're not here to be our kumbaya circle. They're not going to, especially if anything you want them to confirm is going to make them vulnerable, it's not happening. That's not happening. Dean, if you can hear me and you're
Times
frozen
in the
up, if
past.
you want, okay,
Are
so
you
you
back?
froze up. No,
Oh, okay.
you
No, I
went
kept talking
somewhere.
because I didn't know if we'd lost you or we'd lost me, so
No,
I kept talking.
we lost you. You froze right up. Your head froze right up on the whole thing. So I kept talking to you. So I don't know. We'll find out. Somebody in the chat, you can tell me who froze up. Was it Dean? I think you might have frozen up. I don't know.
Well,
Someone can let me know. Come
I
on,
live in
there's
a
a few of
cabin
you
in the
out
woods,
there.
so it's probably more than
It
likely
it
my
it
internet is
it
dodgy.
happened. Yeah, I left off basically saying the government. We kind of got a dysfunctional relationship with the government. We don't know it.
Well, we do, and I think I mean, I totally agree. I think that's so clear. But the weird thing to me is that a community or a sub community or a subculture that hasn't trusted the government at all, literally since UFO books first started being published, like literally, like in the late 40s, early. Did somebody just say I froze? Dang.
Yeah.
Um, since a government that the UFO community or sub community or subculture hasn't trusted since the early 50s. I mean, that's been almost the basis of that's part of the mythology as much as extraterrestrials is part of the mythology that the government knows and isn't telling us. I mean, this is a story that goes back to the early Donald Kehoe books and the early Frank Scully books. It's all Ray Palmer's writings. It goes way back, but that this community, all they want is the government to tell them the truth. If I was part of a community that hadn't trusted the government historically since the late 40s, early 50s, why, when they told me what I wanted to believe, would I think I was finally being told the truth? That's more naive than
Mhm.
believing what the ETs are telling you. The ETs, and I'm putting parenthesis around them, are telling you.
I know it's crazy, and you get that it's out there on the internet today with all these people pushing bad narratives in mainstream media and podcasters, and so people are trusting looking at different podcasts, telling them other things about history, and now we're being called out like, no, you need by these people who are saying they are for free speech. Now they're saying, oh no, they're not the experts. They're not this now. You're getting this whole realm. I'm going to talk about it on Sunday, guys. Well, I won't go in there. But I'm just like, why would we be dumb enough to be bullied by you to make us only trust experts or New York Times when we know they all lie? Like, are we that messed up?
Well, I would particularly think over the course of the last, 4 or 5 years, the last thing we would trust is any experts who are
It's
presented
it.
as experts to us by the mainstream media. They're the
I would.
last people I would trust.
Yeah, I mean, an expert would have to be totally independent for me to even listen at this point because otherwise they're paid propaganda, in my opinion.
I agree, and that I think loops back to flying saucers again or UFOs again. I think when we have whistleblowers and when we have, New York Times stories, and when we have this general idea of disclosures coming through all of these sources, which I don't know why I would trust them all of a sudden, because again, the UFO community hasn't trusted any of these people for the better part of 70, 80 years. Why all of a sudden you can trust these sources? To me, it's far more likely that the push towards disclosure and the release of information, whether it's in congressional hearings or DOD, press conferences, or stories leaked to the New York Times, or these organizations loaded with, like, to the Stars Academy or whatever else, loaded with various, government, or ex-government, ex-intelligence people, which incidentally is the history of
Mhm.
ufology. Like, if you go back and look at the early UFO groups, they were loaded with people who were ex-intelligence and ex-military as well. Like,
Interesting.
just to assume that you are being told the truth because these people are kind of telling you what you want to hear, but they all seem to be within this
Mhm.
channel of information, I would think intentionally being released. And that it might mean it's true. It's probably not true at all, but why would you I just can't get over that hump of why do you think
I
this is true?
Yeah, I think it just alludes to how much we have been made to, like, there is something about studying and stuff and getting your degree, and, I mean, you have your degree, but
I
there's
have three.
also
Yeah.
that can be played against you, and a lot of people who want to have their degree and do good studies and are actually there trying to make money, and they get caught up in this system that's like, "No, you're making money, you have to say this for our corporation or our government," or whatever. Life doesn't go how they think it's going to go and they can't be independent. But it's like this whole idea that we have bought into this idea that it has to be totally this professional look. And that's what media propaganda is like. Well, they've kind of raised us from birth to now or wherever to believe that it has to be a certain way, and it's easy for them to construct it now to look that way. All they have to do is pick a couple of things that might be true from their UFO stuff and then weave it with red herrings and distractions, and because I mean they're already alluding that they know time travel, that they're alluding to so many different things, but they're never going to tell us the full truth. They're just going to play with it like a cat mouse game. Like, they've alluded right on the White House, like, and other people have started talking about time travel now. I'm like, "Hey, what fucking game are they playing with us now?"
Right, and you often wonder, or at least I do, I often wonder who the ultimate audience of that kind of information is meant to be. I suspect sometimes it mightn't even be who we think the audience is meant to be. It mightn't always even be us, the American public. It might be because you want, and maybe not in the case of the time travel story, but it might be sometimes that you want information out there as a distraction to even, foreign agencies or
Mhm.
foreign countries. And I wonder how, and or it might be to disguise other things so other stories don't get out. I think that it's easy to say, well, they're trying to trick us about UFOs. I have no doubt that they are, but I don't know the motivation in that. I don't know what the motivation is in the
Mhm.
disinformation or the psyop. I don't
No.
know who the intent, I don't know who the victim of the psyop is meant to be, or who's meant to
Yeah.
consume the disinformation, or what
It
the
could have
reason is
multiple
for it.
purposes. Could have multiple purposes, you
Quite
know?
possibly.
What you talked about, near-death experiences being similar to alien abduction. I had never really conflated the 2. I'd heard about fairies, but not NDEs. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a Kenneth Ring book called, what's it called? Whitley Strieber wrote the introduction to it. Anyway, if anybody wants to Google Kenneth Ring near death experience, alien abductions, or what's it called? I think it's called the Amiga something. I haven't read it for a while, but
Mhm.
there are very clear commonalities between people who supposedly have undergone alien abduction experiences and people who have come back from near death experiences, including things like, like, tunnels of light and seeing dead humans, and the connection between death and things like alien abduction and things like fairy faith could be another part of the deception that that I was talking about earlier, because maybe, as Joshua Cutchin suggested in his wonderful 2-volume book, Ecology of Souls, that a lot of these things seem to be related to death. Whitley Strieber, who might be the most famous alien abductee conceivably, or certainly the most publicized, who wrote the book, obviously, Communion, and a series of books after that, and has had, he used to, I think, do the Art Bell show, the weekend show Dreamland, and then he did his own Dreamland podcast. So certainly a heavy hitter in this space. Apparently his wife, Anne, who's now passed, when they were receiving all these letters from other experiences, when they'd sent out this, kind of, I think, call for letters, or maybe people just started mailing them, actually, I can't even remember now, said, this has something to do with death. And Whitley became sure that this had something to do with death. And if you look again at those earlier traditions, fairy faith again would be a really good example. The fairies were intricately connected with the dead. The dead, and when you read many of those early fairy stories, people who died were often thought to go to the fairies. Sometimes people who hadn't really died were taken by the fairies. Sometimes people would see dead relatives in fairy processions. Like, there was a very clear connection. And there seems to be a clear connection in at least some of alien abduction reports. And Whitley himself talked about still having connections and contacts with his wife Anne after she passed. And again, if we loop back into the Gnostic kind of idea, the idea that this reality isn't the base reality, then perhaps when we pass on, we do go to some closer to, or maybe the reality. We enter perhaps a spiritual reality
Right.
then. And this is, again, as we've already talked about, connected via the PK Dick story, and um, and the Matrix and other things, that this reality mightn't be the real reality. So I do think that there's a connection between death and the near-death experience and alien abductions and ETs. I mean, I think all of these things are connected. I'm not sure 100% what that means, and I think certainly my views aren't any more, I think nobody's an expert in this, is another way of saying it. Like, I
Right.
can't tell you what this means, but I think there are connections, and maybe that's where the secret lies, working out the
Well, it
connection.
kinda reminds me some of it reminds me of, like, ancient Greek mythology where, where Persephone went to Hades and she had to go back there because she ate the pomegranates, or she participated in something, and then she could
Right.
only come and they had to make a deal with Zeus and stuff. So, like, there's a whole bunch of these kind of concepts within different mythologies in history, or, like, where you're taken to this land away and you're not to eat anything there or touch or whatever, otherwise you're there forever.
And yeah, that's certainly part of fairy faith. One of the things that people who were raised in fairy faith knew instantly was, you don't eat with the fairies. Like, the last thing you do is take any
Mhm,
food they offer you. Because if you go to fairyland, if you go to one of their forts, or you go to wherever they live and you eat, you aren't coming back. So there was
mhm.
always, I think this is a clear current through a lot of this as well, that you don't partake of food when you're with the other.
Right.
And you see some of that in UFO belief as well. There's a story not that far from me. A farmer called Joe Simonton, and it's not. I think it's maybe an hour from where I am in Wisconsin. It's a very famous weird UFO account where he had a UFO experience, like an experience with the occupants of the craft as well, and they came to him and they wanted him to give them, I think, water to make pancakes, and they made pancakes, and they brought him back a pancake and gave it to him. There's still a sample of that pancake, by the way, out there. Like, I don't know. I think J. Allen Hynek came and got the pancake or something, and now it belongs to, like, I think QFOS or whatever the remnants of QFOS are.
That's
Have
the strangest thing I've ever heard. I've never
yeah,
heard that before.
yeah, the Joe Simonton UFO pancake story. I
They
think it was an
made a
Eagle. I think it
pancake.
was Eagle River, somewhere like that. Not very far from where I live.
Wow. That's very different to say that I've never heard of anything like that. That's really different. I don't know what anybody in the audience thinks that if you guys have heard of, but I've never heard of that level of physical. How can they prove that the pancake was made by an alien though? You can't
Well, they
really,
can't,
can you?
and I think Simonton didn't want any money from it. Like, I think he regretted afterwards that he told his story. He seemed very sincere. He never tried to, like, gimmick it up to make cash from it or anything. He was just like,
Someone
"This
thought it was
happened."
a wafer.
Who
Huh?
knows? No, it was a
Pancake
pancake,
sounds better.
and
I'd
apparently I
rather
think it
have a pancake.
but I don't think it was very tasty. I think Simonton might have said it tasted like cardboard or something. But again, they're still physically a part of this pancake, like in a major UFO,
Somebody gotta get
investigative
up on
group.
their pancake making skills.
And then you
Wow.
wonder, like, did aliens come and make or did he go into some fugue state and he just made the pancakes himself and he was like in, this different, I don't know.
That's bizarre. I'm so
So
sure there's
strange.
other strange, incidences of people who claim abduction where they're claiming strange things happen to them or, like, requests or I don't know. I'm not really up on all the I remember, like, Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky, and I knew the typical ones, like, they wanted to procreate or do sample testing, but
Right.
never like a pancake or What what's a burger taste like? How do you do this? Actually, that sounds actually reasonable that an alien would be like, "Hey, look, we've been watching you for a while, and we kinda wanna know how you doing this stuff. Can we take some stuff and make it? Why not?"
I mean, it seems as believable as any of these stories. There's a human element to that, but again, there's a fairy element to that as well. It's so much of this is nonsensical. So much of this is like high strangeness. Like, it's beyond just something vaguely strange. Like, it's super weird. Like, that story is. You're right. The Simonton pancake story is nuts, and it's difficult to make sense of it. But perhaps therein lies the clue to some of these contact experiences. Therein might be, when we were talking before about PK Dick saying that UFOs seem to appear like Valis, they might be here to wake us up from something. This trickster element or this high strangeness or super weird element might be an important part of the pattern, I suppose, so to speak. Jacques Vallée talked about, who's one of the great, maybe the greatest, him and Keel are probably two of the greatest UFO authors and thinkers, at least in my book. Vallée considered the UFO experience or the UFO phenomenon might be a control system. It might be like a thermostat, which understands to kick in the furnace when a certain temperature is hit. Like, I can set my thermostat and go, okay, I'll set it to 60 tonight so it doesn't, in the winter, so it doesn't get too cold, but I don't need it hotter than that while I'm sleeping. But maybe the UFO phenomenon isn't to somehow control temperature. Maybe it's to somehow have an impact on the human psyche, and it appears at certain times, and maybe beyond the UFO phenomenon, maybe things that we don't think of as the UFO phenomenon because they happened prior to 1947. Maybe these things appear to us to somehow affect our conception of reality. Again, as PK Dick suggested, maybe these things somehow have an impact on our belief systems about religious ideas or about social and cultural ideas. And something else, I think, and I'll say something, another point of Vallee's, which I've always thought, or another kind of allegory of Vallee's I've always thought is particularly telling, is and I think this might be one of the most important things Jacques Vallée ever wrote, or one of his most important theories, was that the UFO phenomenon might be closer to the experience we have when we go to the cinema. When we go to the cinema and sit in the dark theater and we're, facing the screen, what we're paying attention to are the images on the screen and the surround sound, hitting us with emotional music and, these layered soundtracks. We're not paying attention to the real technology. The real technology causing us to experience all these things is behind us in the dark, up in the projection booth, right? So we're not experiencing the technology, we're experiencing what the technology shows us. And if an audience walked out of a movie and you asked one audience member from that movie, "Oh, what did you just experience?" They might say, "Well, it was this terribly terrifying horror movie and I was on the edge of my seat and it was so bloody and so scary." But the next audience, the cinema might change the movie they're playing in that in
Mhm.
that theater, that cinema, and it might be a romantic comedy. And then the next people to come out, you might ask somebody from that audience, "Hey, what did you think of the movie? What was it like?" "Oh, it was amazing. It was so romantic, and I'm so happy the boy got the girl in the end," or whatever. So whatever the story is that the people experience, it's not the technology showing them the story. The technology is always the
Mhm.
same. But
There's
what they're
changing
experiencing
feel.
can be very different, person to person, audience to audience.
Well, I guess the question is who's running the mechanism in changing the real?
That is the question, and that's what Valet wanted to do. Valet wanted to have a peek into the control system, to have a peek into the projection booth, and that's probably the $60,000 question, or what was it? Was it $64,000 question? Whatever that old show was, the $1 billion question, perhaps. That's the question.
Yeah, because it's interesting because you just have the experience. You're in real. You're walking around, or you have this experience. You can't. I mean, at least when I'm in the movie, I'm like, I know the projector's up there projecting it. With a UFO abduction, you don't know. You think that's really there and it's happening. No one's told you there's a projection. No one's told you there's some force or something doing something or experimenting on you or showing you something, and they're testing, or they're, I don't know what they're doing. You're not aware of that. It's like you're in some sort of, oh, what's that movie called with Jim Carrey? You're like in some experiment, but you're not
Oh,
aware.
the
Everything's
Truman Show.
fake. Yeah, it's like some sort of alien Truman. It's like you don't know, you're not aware, but in a movie, you are aware that there is a mechanism up there, and you are actually aware of the technology.
Yeah, at least I guess you kind of suspend your disbelief, I guess, when you go to a movie, but at
Hmm.
least you still know that you're experiencing something that is fabricated. But when you have an experience with the anomalous, unless you were raised in fairy faith or another older tradition, then they knew in a way they were going into the cinema, right? And they knew that they were being presented with something
Yeah,
which
they
wasn't
knew the
true.
fairies were tricking them because they were
Right.
told, and like you said, we're not told these things.
We don't have nobody is taught how to deal with the other today. I mean, maybe there are some churches that warn people about, be careful with, talking to spirits, or, be careful of satanic influences or things. But for the most part, in culture, we're not warned. If you and that would be very few churches probably anyway, but for in the most part, we have no warning when we're raised. Your grandparents aren't sitting you by the hearth in, I don't know,
Yeah,
in Kelly County or somewhere in Ireland, and saying, "Don't go out on the quarter days, if you've
yeah.
counted their fair folk, don't eat food with them." You're not given these
If
warnings.
if anything, our culture is always telling us to put our guard down and be accepting and just live
Exactly.
life. You know, have you ever heard of anything about occultism and magic and spells causing any kind of UFO experience? Has anyone come up with a theory surrounding like some occults manifesting or bringing stuff? Because I know I had a not a I had a sleep paralysis experience. I was doing this podcast a long time ago, and my co-host we had this story there was this story about a ghost cat in a castle, and we decided to do an experiment, and he drew a picture of it on our podcast, and we thought maybe we can do this kind of experiment where we can make the cat manifest if we think about it and draw it. And he started doing weird ritual stuff. I was so busy working, I forgot about it. I didn't do anything on it. He was doing rituals trying to manifest this cat. And he said he started seeing a shadow of a cat. And then within, I don't know, less than a week, I had a sleep paralysis experience where this outline of a body figure that was like marbly and weird and like alien, like came in my house. I couldn't move from the bed and it climbed on top of me, and I was able to get it off and wake
Wow.
up. And I contacted him and said, can you stop? Like, I think we need to stop this manifestation stuff, because and then as soon as he stopped, it all went away. I was like, I think something weird's going on. So I thought, well, maybe people can do ritual stuff and weird things can happen.
That's a fascinating story, Melissa.
It was spooky. It was creepy. I was like, you gotta stop this cat crap, because it ain't coming as a cat to me.
I take your point, and there are cases. A classic case would be Aleister Crowley, who is probably the best known practitioner of magic in maybe the 20th century. And Crowley summoned a being that his drawings of look very much like a grey extraterrestrial, a big head and strange eyes. And so there is certainly that connection to the magic and the other. I think maybe the entire expectation of what the phenomenon is going to be might be its own magic. For example, there's something called the Philip experiment, I think, and I think it even took
That's
place
what
in
we were
Canada.
trying to that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to
Okay.
mimic. We weren't trying to do occult, really. We were just trying to mimic the Philip experiment to see if we thought about it enough, that we can make the cat show up. It didn't show up as a cat. Not for me. I was like, the Philip experiment is over. I ain't having something crawl up on my bed and push on me and like choke me. I've never had that happen like that before, so I was like, no, we're done.
But I do think then that's a very similar thing. So I think when we put energy into things, then we might get those things appear. Again, your experience, the Philip experiment, but maybe this happens on a broader culture as well. So if everybody's living in a culture where when you encounter a humanoid, non-human figure, you've been raised on science fiction movies and UFO talk radio or Coast to Coast and X-Files shows, then that humanoid, non-human figure is probably going to be an extraterrestrial. And if you were raised in Ireland, that figure would have been, a fairy. At least in Ireland, you were warned. But so I
Mhm,
do
mhm.
think that there might be a magic or there might be a summoning above and beyond, like Aleister Crowley actually doing rituals to summon something that looks like a grey extraterrestrial, right? There,
Right.
we might be. There mightn't require the actual practice of ritualism. It might just be the practice of people believing enough in these things,
Right.
whether as an individual or whether as an entire society, that then as a result, these are the things which we experience, or these are the things that manifest. And I think that is probably a big part of what's actually happening.
Yeah. Which I think is because I mean we know we're here for sure. I maybe okay, maybe not. I don't know. Now I'm gonna. But if we're here, obviously something we're doing has to be part of it, anyways.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's some kind of okay, to say it another way, whatever the phenomenon is, I'm almost positive that we are somehow engaging in its manifestation. And Greg Bishop, who's written a number of important books, but he wrote an article or a chapter in the late Robbie Graham's wonderful collection of articles called
Right.
UFOs Reframing the Debate. And Greg Bishop talked about the idea of co-creation theory. And other people had already suggested similar things. Again, Keel and Vallée, and but Bishop kind of perhaps put it, more succinctly, or paid more attention to to laying it out. But the idea that we are bringing whatever this external force is, that we're somehow bringing something to the experience as well. I think that's almost undeniable, because when you look at the history of experiences with, again, whether you want to call it the paranormal or the other, or the numinous or the divine or whatever, when we've had experiences with non-human intelligences, they've seemed to present to us the way we expect them to present to us. They seem to have presented within the cultural constructs of the time. And perhaps there's no greater example of that than UFO belief, right? Like,
Mhm, mhm.
these experiences start at the beginning of the atomic age, on the cusp of the space age, with all this science fiction has only started like hardcore 10 or so years before, and it's building, and we have this idea of space and other worlds as, front and center, and advanced rocket technology, and all of these things is when the UFO phenomenon starts. So it's not surprising.
Well, yeah, well, you do know, like, the guys that were involved with NASA and rocket tech, Jack Parsons was a Crowleyite, a Thelema. He was into the occult. So there was a lot of
Exactly.
weird sex ritual occult people involved in this stuff too. And Nazis, like crazy stuff was going on behind the scenes, in my opinion.
And some, it's probably related to some of the things I've been talking about as well, but certainly I think some of that Nazi involvement might have part to do with the more, potentially more mundane explanations of some of it as well. Like, I'm sympathetic to the idea that perhaps if something beyond a weather balloon or beyond a high altitude balloon crashed in Roswell, maybe it was us testing advanced Nazi technology that we'd brought over in Operation Paperclip, and there was
Mhm.
good reason, to kind of shut that story down pretty quickly when it
Yeah.
was first released. So I do think that you can't you can't talk about the history of the space race without talking about our
Well,
appropriation of
hey,
Nazis and
and
Nazi technology.
yeah, I mean, hey, and even the Nazis, remember this, they were highly involved in the occult too. There's magic, ritual, occultism wrapped in all this stuff. Germany, like before Adolf Hitler came to power, was rife with occultism and weird, crazy stuff. And the
Right?
Germans, like the Nazi Party, just like wrapped that stuff up. And so I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's crazy, but maybe it is just our minds manifesting stuff. But I don't know. I think it's all interconnected with this weird ritual stuff.
No, I
Because
agree.
they're all seeped into it, and I think that's why it can be so dangerous, because you don't really actually, when you're doing crazy occult stuff, you actually think you have control, but I don't think you actually have as much control as you think where it's gonna go.
Well,
You can
well,
never
totally.
know.
And just quickly, because you were asking about this before, Albert K. Bender, who is one of the first people who has, maybe not the first Men in Black story, but possibly one of the most famous early Men in Black stories, chronicled in Gray Barker's They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. John Keel makes the point of saying Bender was as much into the occult and horror and everything else weird as he was
Mhm.
into UFOs. So, is it any surprise he sees three menacing men in black visit him? And
No.
Keel would always say, if you were haunted by this kind of stuff, this is all like all kinds of demonology. Get rid of it. Burn your UFO books, burn your occult books. Don't think about it anymore, because the more you think
Right.
about it, the more you give it that access to you, the more it's going to manifest.
Yeah, it's like psychic backlash. You're staring into the void, and it kinda looks right back at you, sort of thing.
Indeed.
Um And yeah, I don't know what that means about reality and what it really is. I have no idea. I'm like, I don't know what it means, but I think it's definitely happening where these occultists are creating some crazy stuff, and they're not just creating rockets, they're creating other weird elements as an offshoot.
Well, maybe that's the real value of all of this stuff. Maybe the real value of UFOs and every other anomalous thing under the sun isn't so much that specific phenomenon, but as you were saying then, who knows what any of this stuff means? Maybe it is somehow, as Philip K. Dick would have thought, somehow it's pointing us to a different reality. Somehow it's suggesting that there are cracks in this reality. Maybe that's the value of all of this stuff. Maybe we get too caught up in, oh, is there going to be a disclosure? Or, oh, was that really my great aunt Edna talking to me in the other night in the old family mansion? Or was that really the Virgin Mary? Or was that really a Sasquatch? Maybe all of these things are there to tell us that, reality is far stranger than we ever pictured it being.
I guess that's why you do talking weird. It's like because
Probably.
there's a lot of weird stuff. Yeah. Well, I don't want to hold you up too much longer. Do you have any last elements to say that you want to cover before we go about this sort of UFO deception, or any other things that we missed that are important to cover?
I mean, you and I could probably talk about all this stuff for the next 12 hours, but I do think it's important to, if you have an experience or you're talking to or you're aware of anybody who's had an experience, to without dismissing that experience as not having happened, because I think that can be equally traumatic. I think it's also problematic to assume that what you thought you saw was the base reality of it.
Mhm.
I think that's the most important message I can probably give. Be aware that maybe you were deceived by whatever the phenomenon was, and maybe you were also deceived by your own expectations of what that phenomenon should be. And try not to change your entire, belief system because you think you saw little gray men from Zeta Reticula, because
Right.
you might not have, it might have been something else. So just don't, I'm not downplaying anybody's experience, but I am suggesting that there seems to be a very good case that you might be being lied to. And on that note, I might just read a quote from G.K. Chesterton, who was a famous English author and also a Christian apologist. And he wasn't talking about UFOs. I think he was talking about experiences had with seances and things like that. But I think it applies to all of this. I think it applies to fairies, to UFOs, to Bigfoot, to any anomalous experience. And he said, whether it's produced by some subconscious but still human force, or by some powers good, bad, or indifferent, which are external to humanity, I would not myself attempt to decide. The only thing I will say with complete confidence about that mystic and invisible power is that it tells us lies. And I think that applies to the UFO phenomenon as much as to anything in the paranormal.
Mhm. Well, I know when I was talking about the Saturn moon matrix the other day and the black cube, and I mentioned that it could be something that's absorbing energy from us. And it doesn't matter if you give it positive or negative energy, it's just like whatever. And it's ritual, just like some of this satanic stuff or Aleister Crowley or whatever. And the solution really was to try and be as neutral as you can and not give it the extreme reactions of joy or fear or whatever it is. To try to have a neutral tone. So, like, if you're having a UFO experience, I'm sure it's so totally traumatizing. It's hard to be neutral, but I think it might help you to analyze it and be more. I don't know. It just might help you deal with it better than to go totally euphoric in a new UFO religion or be so scared you can't sleep. Just to
Right.
try to get to that neutral place where you're actually not feeding it too much. However,
I,
you have to do that.
I agree. I think the the reality that a lot of people have an experience with whatever it is, the other, or the whatever we term we want to use, the numinous, the whatever, and that experience, if they're not careful, can redefine their life. I think that's dangerous. I think that one experience, you let it overtake your life. I don't think that's healthy. I think it is more important to step back and think, what was this really?
Yeah. You don't know. They could be opening weird portals with CERN. And
Maybe.
or they could be putting all these cute they could be putting all this stuff all over the place, and it's unintentionally getting letting things come in from somewhere else, and they're sucking up your energy like a parasite. And but it's emotional or psychological energy. I don't
Maybe
know.
that's what it wants.
Just throwing it out there.
No,
But
I think that that's quite possible, and again, that's why to be careful about what believing or changing your entire concept of,
yeah.
life and cosmology based on this
And
one brief experience.
And I bet it's hard and I bet it's difficult because some of the experience people are having is really traumatizing and shocking for them. So I'm not like judging anyone or saying, oh, you better do this. I understand it's probably totally traumatic, especially if you didn't, no one warned you, like they warn you about the fairies. You're like,
Right.
what? And you don't know what to do. And it's scary or it could be terrifying. Like some people who have, those, night terrors or old hag, I mean, they're terrified. It's very real and very scary.
Oh, it is. It is terrifying. And I
So
think
I
that
can
comes back
imagine.
too quickly to the Funbo clown story I told at the beginning. I think you shouldn't dismiss if somebody had been if a child had been kidnapped by Funbo the clown, it wouldn't do any good to tell that child. It would be traumatic to say you imagined it. None of that
Mhm.
happened. But it would be equally problematic if you told that child, yes, you were actually taken by a clown who lives in Disneyland and his name is Funbo. Because the
Yeah.
police certainly, if you told them the story, the police certainly aren't going to go to Disneyland canvassing for Funbo the clown because that's what the pederast said who was in the van. You can
Mhm.
accept that the experience is traumatic and problematic without accepting that what it presented to you is reality. And I think that's
Yeah.
something which is very difficult for most people to do.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's traumatizing, but I mean, I know of people who had UFO experiences and all this trauma, and they start their whole lives became about UFO, and they divorced their wife and everything. Like
Yeah,
it went crazy. I'm not going to say any names, but I know of them, and I could tell they weren't mentally stable.
it's not that
I was
uncommon.
like, whoa, it's like it's almost a religious crazy experience for them, and other people don't understand, so they're angry about it.
Yeah, and that's not that uncommon. People can be transformed by that one, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it making you rethink the nature of reality. I think there's a problem where you were directed by that what you thought you experienced to redefine reality. You know what I mean? Like it's if
Yeah.
you have a numinous experience, it's okay, I think, to go, well, world is stranger and weirder than I thought it was. But to go, well, now I know the Zeta Reticulans are coming to colonize the planet Earth and, to harvest my children and to take over after they have enough clones in the year 2050.
Yeah.
That's when it gets
Next thing you know, they're
problematic.
in a weird cult, and they're waiting for a Hale Bob comment or something, right? Yeah.
Right. That's
No,
the
it can be
danger.
dangerous. Yeah, you have to be grounded and neutral. All right. Well, I thank you so much for coming on the show, Dean. Where can people find Talking Weird podcast? I'll put the
Well, they
address
can
up.
find Talking Weird just by looking for Untold Radio Network. I think you can go to
Mhm.
untoldradioam.com, or you can just Google Untold Radio, and we're every Tuesday night live at 9 p.m. Central. If they're also interested in what I'm doing, I'm currently making a feature film about Richard Shaver, Ray Palmer, and the creation of modern UFO belief. I have a short version of it on the festival circuit at the moment, just called The Shaver Mystery. But if they want to keep up with that, and maybe they get a chance to see The Shaver Mystery where it plays near them, or when the feature will screen in the not too distant future, although I'm still making that film, they can go to theshavermystery.com. And shaver is the way you would think you would spell it, like an electric shaver, electric razor, electric, like
Mhm.
the Shaver Mystery. and that will take them to the Facebook page where they can also contact me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to pop you out, Dean, and you don't have to hang around if you don't want to. And I'm just going to tie up the show. Thanks for coming on.
I'm going to check on my daughter, but I will be back after you've tied up the show.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Woo! That was a great show. Yeah, like I say about the UFO stuff, I say neutral not to like patronize anybody. I just say that because it helps you analyze and stay grounded and stay focused, and it might take some power away from whatever that is. I know it's probably terrifying if you have an experience and it's like some kind of bug looking, like I'd be screaming. If that was me, I'd be terrified. But if you can calm down and be neutral about it and go, okay, well, I still have my same life. I still have everything happening. I just got to be neutral. If it happens again, just try to analyze it or take the power away from it somehow. I don't know. I've never actually, I've had a sleep paralysis experience, like I just told you, but I've never had an alien abduction. I've never actually seen a UFO in the sky or anything like that. I've had ghost experiences, but I can't speak to any of that stuff from personal experience. So anybody who's out there who's had it and you have a different advice, feel free to leave a comment about what you think it is or what you think you should do if you're experiencing this or something like that. Or do you think it really is aliens, or do you think we're projecting, or what do you think's, the mechanism that's causing this? All right. So again, guys, I'm not going to be doing a stream tomorrow. Usually I do Thursdays, but I have so much stuff happening tomorrow, and we're putting a whole new air conditioning system, and I got a lot to deal with. So I'm going to focus on that tomorrow. I will be here on Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern, conspiracy theory. We're going to mention a whole bunch of things. I'll find some good, there's always good conspiracy theory topics and political topics to talk about. So 7 p.m. Eastern, go to the website, genxonx.com. That's where all the streaming links are. We stream live on YouTube, Rumble, and X. I think I'm going to try to if I get some time tomorrow, I'm going to try to sign up for Censored TV or some other platform that we can put this to, just to have a fourth one. I'd love to have a fourth one, but go to genxonx.com. Audio podcast people, that's genxonx.com. That's where all the updates and the website and the links and the audio podcast links and the donation. You guys can donate to the show by doing either PayPal, you can do a Venmo, or you can do a Cash App. All the links are on the website. You can also become a subscriber on my X account, because I give you guys little bonuses. Like I made a little mini documentary on Ted Bundy Murder Cave. If you go to @GenXNews on X, right on X, you can $5 a month, become a subscriber. You're donating to the show, but you're getting extra content and streams and all that stuff. So I thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm going to sign off, and I got to call my husband. He's working hard on the road, and I will talk to you guys on Sunday. Thank you guys so much for showing up.